"He's just a waiter," my son-in-law declared to the wedding guests, pointing at me with contempt, as if I were a shadow unworthy of his elite world. The guests nodded, and I silently filled their glasses. But when someone exclaimed, "My God, he's on television," my son-in-law dropped his champagne glass. That moment changed everything, and what happened next would destroy his perfect facade forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'm curious if anyone else has dealt with family betrayal like this. The gift box felt heavier in my hands than it should have. Marcus Thompson's marble foyer stretched before me like a museum exhibit, all sharp edges and cold surfaces that screamed wealth but whispered nothing of warmth. My daughter Isabella appeared from the kitchen, her smile bright but strained in that way I'd learned to recognize over the years. "Dad, you made it," she said, kissing my cheek while glancing at the wrapped box in my hands. "What's that, grandfather's watch?" I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Thought you might want it for the wedding." Marcus emerged from the living room, wineglass in hand, surveying me like I'd tracked mud across his Persian rug. His gaze lingered on my pressed khakis and polo shirt, my best clothes, but clearly not enough for his standards. The man had a way of making you feel small without saying a word, though he'd certainly say plenty before the evening was over. "Robert," he said, his handshake brief and dismissive. "Still working at that Italian place, Bella Vista?" "Yes. Antonio's been good to me." I kept my voice level, professional. 20 years of serving tables had taught me how to maintain dignity even when others tried to strip it away. Marcus's attention shifted to the gift box like a hawk spotting prey. "What's in there?" Isabella bounced on her toes with the excitement I remembered from her childhood Christmas mornings. "Grandpa's watch, Dad. Can I see it?" I unwrapped it carefully, revealing the gold pocket watch that had belonged to my father and his father before him. 3 generations of working men who understood the value of time and honest labor. Isabella's eyes widened with genuine appreciation, but Marcus barely glanced at it. "Vintage," he said flatly, the word dripping with dismissal. "Probably worth something to a collector." The comment stung more than it should have. This wasn't about money. It was about family, about history, about the continuity that connects us to something larger than ourselves. But before I could explain the watch's real significance, Aunt Patricia called from the dining room. "Dinner's ready." We moved to the table, another showcase of Marcus's wealth. Crystal glasses caught the light from an ornate chandelier that probably cost more than my annual salary. I took the seat Isabella indicated, feeling increasingly out of place among the expensive settings and designer everything. So I began attempting conversation while cutting into what Marcus had proudly announced was Wagyu beef, the wedding planning. Must be exciting. "How many guests are you expecting?" Marcus's knife moved with surgical precision. "We're keeping it intimate. Close friends, professional associates." His emphasis on professional wasn't lost on me. My colleagues from the law firm, Isabella added quickly, trying to bridge the growing tension. "Marcus's business partners, family, of course." "Of course," Marcus echoed, but something in his tone made me look up from my plate. The conversation continued around me. Wedding venues, catering choices, flower arrangements. But I found myself studying my future son-in-law's face. There was a calculation there, a coldness that didn't match his earlier charm with Isabella. Finally, Marcus set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Robert, I think we should discuss something." Isabella's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and I saw fear flicker across her features. She knew what was coming, had probably argued against it, maybe even fought about it behind closed doors. "What about?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely at ease in his domain. "It's about the wedding. About your place in Isabella's new life." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. After 20 years of raising Isabella alone, of working double shifts to pay for her education, of being there for every milestone and heartbreak, Marcus Thompson was about to tell me I wasn't good enough for his world. "I need to be direct." Robert Marcus continued, his voice taking on the boardroom authority that had probably intimidated countless business rivals. "My guests are influential people, tech executives, venture capitalists, city council members. This isn't just a celebration. It's a networking opportunity." Isabella's voice held a warning. "Marcus." He ignored her completely, his focus laser sharp on me. "You're a waiter. My guests move in different circles. Your presence would be problematic." The words hit like a physical blow. I felt my face flush, my hands tighten on my napkin. Around the table, silence settled heavy as lead. This was worse than I'd imagined. Not just exclusion, but complete dismissal of my worth as a human being. "That's my father," Isabella said, her voice sharp with anger and hurt. "And I respect that," Marcus replied smoothly, as if discussing a minor business inconvenience. but this wedding is an investment in our future. I won't risk my reputation because of misplaced sentimentality. I found my voice, though it came out quieter than I intended. I raised Isabella. I worked double shifts to pay for her education, her apartment when she graduated, her car. That was admirable, Marcus. Cut me off with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. But this is reality. You serve food for a living. My guests create jobs, fund startups, influence policy. Do you really think you belong in that conversation? The room spun slightly. Isabella was saying something, her voice rising, but the blood rushing in my ears made it hard to focus. 20 years of sacrifice, of love, of being the only parent Isabella had ever known, reduced to serve food for a living. Aunt Patricia cleared her throat uncomfortably, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Marcus stood up, his decision made with the finality of a corporate verdict. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Robert, would you join me on the terrace? It wasn't really a request. Marcus led me outside, sliding the glass door closed behind us with a soft click that cut off Isabella's protests from inside. His terrace was like everything else in his house. Expensive, designed to impress, devoid of soul. Below us, workers were setting up white chairs in the garden, stringing lights between trees. My daughter's wedding preparations happening right in front of me, and I was about to be banned from witnessing them. Marcus positioned himself against the railing, the garden backdrop, framing him like a portrait of success. I stood awkwardly near the door, still clutching the gift box that now felt like evidence of my inadequacy. Beautiful view, isn't it? He gestured toward the city lights beyond his property. This house cost me $2.8 million. The wedding alone is running $250,000. The number hit me like a slap. $250,000. I'd never seen that much money in my lifetime, let alone considered spending it on a single day. But Marcus wasn't finished with his catalog of superiority. Flowers are $12,000. The photographer another $8,000. Isabella's dress cost $15,000. Each figure was a reminder of the gap between us, a chasm that couldn't be bridged by love or history or 20 years of devotion. I watched the workers below arranging chairs that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I paid for Isabella's college, I said quietly. 4 years at Stanford. Worked double shifts, saved every tip. That was then. Marcus interrupted sharply. This is now. She's my responsibility, and I'm telling you your presence at this wedding would be an embarrassment. Through the glass door, I could see Isabella pacing in the dining room, her face twisted with worry and anger. She kept glancing toward the terrace, but made no move to interrupt. Perhaps she knew this confrontation was inevitable, had been building since the moment she'd brought Marcus home to meet me 6 months ago. You can't just... I started. I can, and I will. Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Do you understand what this day means? Senator Williams will be there, the mayor, CEOs, whose companies could change Isabella's future? And you want to do what served them drinks. The cruelty was breathtaking, but what hurt more was the grain of truth buried in his words. I would be serving drinks. It's what I did, who I was. But Marcus made it sound like a moral failing rather than honest work. She's my daughter, I said simply. She's my fiancé, Marcus replied with finality, and I won't let you turn her wedding into a charity case. That night I sat in my one-bedroom apartment, staring at grandfather's watch on my kitchen table. The silence was complete. No expensive artwork, no crystal glasses catching designer lighting, just photographs of Isabella at various ages covering every available surface. Graduation, birthdays, Christmas mornings when money was tight but happiness was abundant. My phone buzzed. Isabella's name appeared on the screen, and I could hear tears in her voice before she even spoke. Dad, I'm so sorry about tonight. I had no idea Marcus was planning to say those things. It's okay, sweetheart, I lied. Focus on being happy. That's all I've ever wanted. It's not okay, you're my father. You should be at my wedding. You walked me down the aisle at every school play, every award ceremony. This is the most important day of my life, and he wants to exclude you because of your job. I closed my eyes, listening to her pain and knowing I was powerless to fix it. Sometimes life isn't fair, Isabella. But I'll find a way to be there for you, even if it's not the way we planned. How Marcus meant what he said. He won't change his mind. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, thinking about Marcus's words. You serve food for a living, as if that made me less human, less worthy of witnessing my own daughter's wedding. But as I sat there, an idea began forming, crazy, risky, but possible. I pulled out my work uniform from the closet. Black pants, white shirt, black vest, the costume of invisibility that had paid Isabella's way through life. How many important dinners had I served? How many wealthy guests had I made comfortable while remaining utterly forgettable? The uniform felt different in my hands tonight. Not like a symbol of servitude, but like armor, like possibility. Marcus was right about one thing. I was just a waiter, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd forgotten that waiters are invisible. We moved through important events, serving the powerful, hearing their conversations, witnessing their private moments while remaining part of the scenery. I held up the black vest, studying its simple lines. Tomorrow I would call Antonio and ask him a favor, not as Robert Chen, father of the bride, but as Robert Chen, experienced waiter who knew how to disappear into any crowd. The next morning came too early. Sleep had been impossible, my mind cycling through Marcus's cruelty and Isabella's tears. By 8:30, I was dressed and driving toward Bella Vista, the familiar route offering no comfort today. Antonio's SUV sat in the staff parking lot. Good. I needed this conversation to happen before the lunch rush, before other servers arrived with their weekend energy and gossip. Inside, the coffee machine was already brewing. Antonio stood at the prep station, slicing onions with mechanical precision, his weathered hands moving in practiced rhythm. 20 years of friendship had taught me to read his moods, and today he seemed troubled. "You're early," he said without looking up. "Saturday shifts don't start until 10. Couldn't sleep." I poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding sugar to his the way he liked it. The ritual felt important grounding. "Antonio, I need to ask you something." He accepted the coffee, finally meeting my eyes. The lines around them spoke of long nights and difficult decisions, the weight of keeping a family business alive in an expensive city. "What troubles you, my friend? Tomorrow is Isabella's wedding," I began carefully, "at the big house in Hillsborough. Very fancy affair." "Ah, yes," Antonio nodded. "You must be proud." "I am, but there's a problem." I leaned against the counter, choosing my words carefully. "Her fiancé doesn't want me there. Says I'm not good enough for his guests. Too embarrassing. Just a waiter, he called me." Antonio's knife stopped moving. I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the handle. "This man said this to you. Told me not to come to my own daughter's wedding." The silence stretched between us. Antonio set down his knife, his expression shifting from confusion to something much harder. In his voice I heard the echo of every slight he'd endured as an immigrant, every time someone had looked through him like he didn't matter. What kind of man turns away a father from his daughter's wedding? The kind who cares more about appearances than family. "That's why I need your help." His eyebrows rose in question. "Hire me to work the wedding. Just for tomorrow." One day, Antonio stared at me like I'd suggested robbing a bank. "You want to work your own daughter's wedding, Robert? That's crazy." "It's the only way to be there. Marcus can't forbid a waiter from working his event. I'll be invisible, just part of the service, but I'll see her walk down the aisle. I'll be there when she says her vows." He shook his head slowly, processing the full implications. "This is not right. A father should sit in the front row, not serve drinks to strangers. Sometimes we don't get what should be. We take what we can get." Antonio returned to his onions, cutting with more force than necessary. The knife blade caught the morning light, flashing like his changing expressions. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past, carrying supplies to restaurants across the city. Normal Saturday morning sounds for everyone except me. "The catering company handles the service," Antonio said finally. "But I know the manager, Giuseppe Torino. We worked together years ago when I first came to America." My chest tightened with hope. Would he add me to the crew? Giuseppe owes me favors. Big ones. Antonio wiped his hands on his apron, decision made. "You're sure about this, Robert? Once you start serving that man's guests, there's no going back. No dignity in retreat. My dignity isn't in question here. His is." Saturday afternoon setup moved with mechanical efficiency. Giuseppe's catering crew transformed the garden into something from a magazine, round tables draped in ivory silk crystal glasses that caught sunlight like prisms, centerpieces of white roses that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I moved between the tables with practiced ease, adjusting angles and ensuring proper spacing for servers to navigate. In my black vest and crisp white shirt, I was invisible again, just another worker preparing for the celebration of people who mattered. The sound of voices from the main house made me look up. Isabella's laugh carried through the afternoon, air bright and nervous, followed by heavier footsteps. Marcus's voice cut through the quiet, directing placement of floral arrangements with the precision of a military operation. They were here for the final walkthrough, checking details for tomorrow's perfection. I hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for seeing them before the wedding day. My hands stilled on the tablecloth I was adjusting. Dad, Isabella's voice floated from the garden entrance. I turned, forcing a smile that felt more natural than expected. She looked radiant in her casual clothes, cheeks flushed with excitement and pre-wedding stress. Behind her, Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something much darker. His perfect features twisted with barely controlled rage. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Working," I replied, simply straightening another chair. "Giuseppe hired me for tomorrow's service." Marcus's face went rigid, his carefully constructed composure cracking like ice under pressure. "You can't be serious. This is harassment." Isabella stepped between us, her wedding glow dimming as she realized the implications. "What's happening? Why are you here, Dad?" "I'm here to work," I repeated, meeting Marcus's furious gaze without flinching. "Nothing more. Your guests won't even notice I exist." "This is manipulation," Marcus snarled, his voice rising. "You want to humiliate me in front of my guests. Make yourself the victim, force your way into spaces where you don't belong." The accusation hung in the air like broken glass. Isabella's hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with the realization that her wedding day was becoming a battlefield between the two men who claimed to love her most. "Stop it, both of you," she whispered, voice cracking with emotion. "This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life." Marcus pointed at me like I was contaminating his perfect event. "He's doing this on purpose, playing the martyred father while destroying everything we've worked for." "I belong wherever my daughter is," I said quietly, and the simple truth of those words seemed to deflate some of Marcus's rage. Not anymore. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried more venom than his shouting. "She's my responsibility now. My wife, my guests, my event. I won't have you serving drinks to people who matter while playing the wounded father." Isabella moved toward me, tears starting to flow. "Dad, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." I touched her shoulder gently, feeling her tremble. "But don't worry, your guests won't even notice I'm here. I'll just do my job." The words stung Marcus more than any insult could have. In his world, being unnoticed was the ultimate insult, worse than being hated. Sunday morning arrived with the weight of destiny. After a sleepless night, I dressed in my server's uniform for what I knew would be the most important shift of my life. The black vest felt like armor, the white shirt like a flag of surrender and defiance all at once. Giuseppe's crew assembled at dawn, transforming the garden into something magical. 250 guests would witness Isabella marry Marcus Thompson, and not one of them would know that the man refilling their champagne was the father of the bride. By noon, the first guests began arriving. Tech executives in $1,000 suits, venture capitalists whose casual conversations involved million city officials whose handshakes could change policies. Marcus's people, the ones who mattered in his carefully constructed world. I moved through them like a ghost, offering champagne and canapés with the practiced invisibility of 20 years' experience. They saw the uniform, not the man wearing it. They noticed the service, not the hands providing it. Champagne, I offered the tray to a distinguished woman in pearls, her evening gown probably worth more than I earned in 6 months. How lovely, she smiled, accepting a glass without really seeing me. What an elegant affair. Marcus certainly knows how to host. Through the crowd, I caught sight of Isabella in her wedding dress, radiant despite the undercurrents swirling around her special day. She was everything I'd hoped she'd become. Educated, successful, beautiful, inside and out. Worth every sacrifice, every double shift, every moment of exhaustion over the past 20 years. Marcus stood beside her, greeting guests with practiced charm, though his eyes kept finding me across the garden. Each time our gazes met, I saw the same calculation, wondering when I might crack, when the humiliation might become too much. An elderly gentleman in a perfectly tailored tuxedo approached my station. "Excellent service, young man. You're very attentive." "Thank you, sir. Would you care for an appetizer?" He selected a salmon canapé from my tray, studying me with the sharp eyes of someone accustomed to reading people. "You carry yourself well." Not many servers have such natural grace these days. The compliment warmed me more than it should have. Natural grace. If only he knew the years of training that had created this ease of movement, this ability to navigate social spaces while remaining invisible. "Robert has worked with us for many years." Giuseppe's voice came from behind me. "One of our finest staff members." The gentleman nodded approvingly. "It shows. Proper service is becoming a lost art." Across the garden, Marcus's voice carried as he laughed at someone's joke, but his laughter seemed forced, his glances in my direction increasingly frequent. The man who had publicly dismissed me as insignificant was discovering that even insignificant people could command respect through dignity and professionalism. As the ceremony began, I positioned myself at the back of the service area, close enough to see Isabella walking down the aisle, but far enough to remain unnoticed. She was breathtaking in her grandmother's dress, the one I'd helped her choose from the attic 6 months ago when money was too tight for designer gowns. Marcus waited at the altar, handsome and confident, playing his role perfectly. But I noticed something the guests couldn't see, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes kept darting to where I stood. My presence was affecting him more than he'd anticipated. The officiant began the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about the joining of two families, about the bonds that connect us across generations. I thought about Isabella's mother dead these 15 years and wished she could see how beautiful our daughter looked. "Do you, Isabella Marie Chen, take Marcus Thompson to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Do you, Marcus Thompson, take Isabella to be your lawfully wedded wife?" A pause. Just a heartbeat, but long enough for doubt to flicker across his features as his eyes found mine one more time. "I do," he said finally, but something had changed in his voice. The reception began with champagne toasts and congratulations, the garden filling with the gentle hum of polite conversation and clinking glasses. I moved through the crowd with my silver tray, refilling glasses and clearing plates while remaining as invisible as furniture. Marcus had positioned himself at the head table like a king holding court, but I noticed his discomfort growing as the afternoon progressed. Every time a guest complimented the service, every time someone praised the attention to detail, his jaw tightened a little more. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus finally stood, tapping his glass with a silver spoon. The garden quieted as all attention turned toward the groom. "If I could have your attention for a moment," I continued, moving between tables, refilling glasses that barely needed, refreshing my trained hands steady despite the growing tension in my chest. "Thank you all for sharing this incredible evening with Isabella and me." Marcus began, his tone warm and confident. "We're surrounded by the people who matter most, colleagues who've built this community, friends who've supported our journey, family who've shaped our values." Applause rippled through the crowd. Isabella beamed up at him, her face glowing with bridal joy and champagne. I paused near a corner table, champagne bottle poised, waiting for the toast to conclude. Marcus's expression shifted subtly, his eyes finding mine across the garden. "Success in life comes from understanding your place, from recognizing what truly matters. We've invited people tonight who represent excellence, achievement, the very best of what our society offers." Something cold settled in my stomach. The toast was taking an unexpected turn, moving away from traditional celebration towards something more pointed. "Which makes it important," Marcus continued, his voice gaining an edge, "to acknowledge different levels of contribution. Not everyone reaches the same heights. Not everyone matters equally." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the warm, unifying message wedding toasts typically delivered. Take this man, for instance. Marcus's hand gestured directly at me, causing every head in the garden to turn. "Robert Chen. He's just a waiter. Never amounted to anything significant. Never built anything lasting. A man who peaked in his 20s and has spent 40 years sliding downward." The champagne bottle felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Isabella's face had gone white, her eyes wide with horror. Around the garden, guests exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable with the cruelty unfolding before them. "He wants to be part of this celebration." Marcus's voice grew stronger, fed by the attention. "But the truth is, there are makers, and there are servers, leaders and followers, people who matter and people who simply exist to facilitate the lives of those who do." I set the champagne bottle on the nearest table with careful precision. My hands remained steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of traffic beyond the garden walls. "Marcus, please stop." Isabella's voice was barely audible, lost in the stunned quiet. But Marcus was beyond stopping now, drunk on power and the intoxication of public dominance. Some people spend their lives dreaming of significance, while others actually achieve it. The difference is fundamental, unchangeable, natural selection in action. I straightened my bow tie and smoothed my vest, habits from another lifetime asserting themselves automatically. When I spoke, my voice carried clearly across the silent garden. "Would anyone like more champagne?" The simple question, delivered with perfect composure, seemed to break Marcus's momentum. He stared at me, perhaps expecting anger, tears, or defensive justification. Instead, he found the same professional courtesy I'd shown every guest that evening. A few people nodded mutely. I retrieved my bottle and continued my rounds, moving between tables with the same graceful efficiency I'd maintained all evening. Each pour was precise, each interaction courteous and warm. Marcus remained standing, his toast hanging unfinished in the air like a broken promise. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Marcus still stood at the head table, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand, while I continued serving with unshakable dignity. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, an elderly woman's voice cut through the tension. "My God," she said, pointing at the large screen television that Giuseppe had set up for the evening's entertainment. "That's him. That's the same man." Every head turned toward the screen where a classic film was playing, the kind Giuseppe always chose for elegant events. The camera was focused on a young man in a naval uniform, his face earnest and hopeful as he delivered lines with natural charisma. "Atlantic Crossing," another guest whispered. "I remember that film. He was wonderful in it." The recognition spread through the crowd like wildfire. Phones emerged as guests searched movie databases and streaming services, their faces bright with discovery and growing excitement. "Robert Chen," someone read from their phone. 7 major films between 1985 and 1992. Golden Globe nomination for Atlantic Crossing. Isabella's hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning understanding. She was seeing her father's sacrifices through new eyes, comprehending the magnitude of what he'd given up for her future. I continued clearing tables, my movements unchanged despite the scrutiny. The young man on the television screen delivered his lines with passion and conviction, while the older man in the garden simply did his job. "Why didn't you say anything?" a guest called out, his tone respectful rather than mocking. I looked up from the plates I was stacking, meeting his gaze with the same quiet dignity I'd maintained all evening. "Tonight isn't about me." The simple response seemed to deepen the crowd's fascination. Here was a man who had once commanded movie screens, who had been recognized and celebrated, now serving champagne without seeking recognition or special treatment. Marcus remained frozen at the head table, his elaborate plans for dominance crumbling around him. The man he'd publicly dismissed as insignificant had just been revealed as someone who had achieved exactly the kind of recognition Marcus desperately craved. Around the garden, phones emerged as guests searched for clips and photographs, eager to connect their glamorous discovery with the gracious server who had impressed them all evening. The television continued playing, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its glow. Isabella stood slowly from her chair and moved toward me, her wedding dress rustling against tables as she navigated through the crowd. Other guests stepped aside, creating a path between us, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. "Dad," her voice broke on the word. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I reached out and took her hands, feeling their tremor through her white gloves. "The past doesn't define us, sweetheart. What matters is that I'm here with you on the most important day of your life." Tears spilled down her cheeks, carrying mascara in dark trails. "You gave up everything for me." "I gained everything," I corrected gently. "A daughter who became an extraordinary woman. 25 years of watching you grow, learn, succeed. No role could have given me that." Around us, the garden had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had emerged from their stations, drawn by the emotion unfolding in their workspace. An elderly man near the windows stood first. "You're a true gentleman, sir." The words seemed to break a dam. Other guests rose their applause, starting tentatively but growing stronger. Soon the entire garden was standing, celebrating not the revelation of a former celebrity, but the recognition of genuine character. Marcus finally sank back into his chair, his face pale, and his champagne glass forgotten. The man who had publicly humiliated me now faced the reality of what he'd done. Attacked a respected actor in front of people who would remember this moment for years. Isabella wrapped her arms around me, her wedding veil cascading over both our shoulders. "I'm so proud to be your daughter." The applause gradually faded, but the energy in the garden had completely transformed. Guests approached with warm handshakes and genuine smiles, no longer seeing a servant but recognizing a fellow human being worthy of respect. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I'm sorry." I looked across the garden at my son-in-law, seeing not the arrogant executive who had tried to exclude me, but a frightened man who had built his identity on superiority and discovered it was hollow. "Apology accepted," I said simply. "But Isabella deserves better than a marriage built on shame and exclusion." The words hung in the evening air as the last light faded from the garden. Marcus had gotten his perfect wedding, surrounded by influential guests and expensive details. But he'd also learned that true worth couldn't be measured in dollars or status. It lived in the love between a father and daughter, in the dignity of honest work, and in the courage to stand up for what matters most. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Isabella took my arm. Will you walk me down the aisle one more time, Dad? The right way this time, I smiled, looking around the garden where I'd spent the day serving others while claiming my rightful place as her father. Always, sweetheart. Always. So what do you think? Did I go too far, or should I have done this sooner? Have you ever had to fight for your place in your own family? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear from others who faced similar betrayals. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible.